To what extent do you agree with the following statement? The printed page is losing its relevance in an increasingly digital world. Strongly, slightly, agree, strongly agree, completely agree. The clock is running. Completely agree. Takes the lead. And I've got to say, that's not too surprising, a little dispiriting. I wondered if I could get you, in particular, to spell out a little bit more about why it doesn't matter should the printed page ever go away. Did you ever, or do you believe that print ad media provides a certain level of engagement, for instance, or a certain kind of delivery on ad objectives that other media doesn't? Or do you think that's all hogwash from publishers?
Well, let me answer it like this. I'm sure I'm not the only person that this has occurred to. I mean, isn't it sort of slightly bizarre that, you will go to a shop and you will spend, $1.50 or $2 or £1 or whatever it is, or 12 renminbi or whatever, buying a newspaper that was printed 12 hours ago or 6 hours ago, versus going online and getting something which is absolutely up to date, has got interactive video in it, which you can interact with always for free. I find that sort of slightly. I really think that's sort of slightly bizarre, quite honestly. It's a sort of a clear indication that I think some print owners have kind of failed to monetize the digital world. Look, there's no question. As I think some of those charts showed for a publication like The Economist, there's a very intimate relationship with a print publication. The key thing is being able to transfer that over into digital. And I would see things like the iPad as an opportunity to enhance that experience. And that's the way I would urge print owners to look at it, print media owners to look at it. I think if you remain fixated in that print world and cling on to that, the likelihood is you're going to have a rough time going forward.
That may be, but I'd also suggest that we might not see the end of print as soon as some people think. The magazine circulation numbers, for example, in print are still pretty strong. Unfortunately, the subscription rates are so low that they're not making any money there, and it's not clear what would happen if you charged more. But there is still a large audience of people that are paying a certain amount of money to get print every day, and it's for a certain reason, even though there is all this digital media available. But we should talk about the iPad and what that does enable and what that doesn't. I've messed around with it some and looked at some magazine and newspaper apps, and they are actually immersive, some of them, in a way that duplicates the print engagement experience. At the same time, it's a digital platform, and I've got a browser a swipe away where free content reigns. And so I wonder what you make of the potential for publishers on the iPad.
I'm so encouraged by what I've seen with publishers on the iPad, not because that what I think there today is it or it's going to be the saviour of the industry, but because it's been embraced with so much enthusiasm and creativity and energy from publishers that we didn't see the first round on mobile. So I think publishers have taken a step back, by and large, not all of them, taken a step back and said, okay, what's this medium going to be really good at? And how do I think about a creative, compelling user experience whilst also thinking about who's going to pay the bills? So I think the ability to bring in more creative ads, the reluctance of most publishers, not all, to just jam standard ad units across their iPad apps and really do something different and position it as an opportunity that particular marketers and brands can own, I think is hugely encouraging, and we should be rallying around it because for me that's the future of the business. The iPad web browsing already matches the same amount of web traffic that's coming from smartphones, and all the Android devices, all the RIM devices, all the iPhone devices, I think it's 0.04% of total online traffic, and there's only 500,000 devices of it out there. So it's extraordinary, and you're right, it is only one swipe away in terms of being able to switch over to web versions, but the experience is completely different. So that's why I think the iPad is so revolutionary, because it delivers on both fronts.
This is the kind of subject that often you'll find plenty of audience questions for. So I'd like to see if anybody out there, I see a hand, if we can get a mic to him. then we can get the audience involved here as well.
Hi, my name is Alisa. I come from Dubai. I think very interesting, but mainly all these examples come from the Western world. How do you foresee the future of newspapers in countries where basically it's being used as political arm? This is my first question. Also, I have another question related to the commercial side. A lot of agencies, they make easy money from newspapers and a lot of countries as well. And they have the fear of moving into this digital world. So again, how do you see now, both parties in some countries trying as much as they can not to let go. At the same time, you have the audience who are moving into this digital platform. So what's going to happen in many of these countries?
Someone care to field?
I'll take the first part of the answer, of the first part of the question, and say that you're absolutely right to point out it's very different in many regions. I think in the Arabic world, although it's still a very heavily regulated newspaper market, we see quite a lot of growth. There's no doubt that circulation is rising, the number of titles is rising, and people's time spent with analog media like newspapers is increasing in those parts of the world. Regulation and government control over media outlets is a whole other subject, and I think that's really a country-by-country kind of analysis that you need to look at. There are also pockets of growth in television and broadcast, particularly in markets like India and, again, the Middle East. So I think the Gulf region as an area is particularly interesting right now and changing. Has very different dynamics because of the regulatory influence, but economically it's also quite different. And then you contrast that with some country like China, where the ability to really control intellectual property rights over content and content creation is a very large challenge, and that shapes the dynamics of the industry in a very different way also.
Which countries are you thinking of primarily when you ask that question from a political point of view, just out of interest? What you call?
The Arab world, Africa.
Yeah. I think the other way of looking at it, is that as media becomes sort of more digital, it makes it harder and harder for governments to keep control of content. And I think one of the lessons that's sort of been learned over the last sort of 20 years or so is you should never, ever underestimate the intelligence of your audience. And I think it will make it a lot more challenging, quite honestly, for governments. I mean, unless you try and restrict access, to websites. And people nearly always find a way around those things, there are always ways around those things. So I actually think it makes it much more challenging, for governments, quite honestly. The second part of your question was really about how newspapers in third world, how they embrace digital. Was that right?
Easier for agencies to make money, and moving into the digital platform. So the let go is not there. They're not encouraging clients to use the digital media instead of the mainstream media.
Yeah. I think that will probably change quite rapidly, quite honestly. And I think any print vehicle in any market that doesn't want to embrace digital, that tries to kind of cling to the past, if you like, frankly, practically anywhere, is going to have difficulties, quite frankly, because one of the things that I think has been interesting, if you look at a market like China. Media habits in China didn't go through all the same stages that they did in the West. They wanted to kind of like go from, being, where they were to being, compatible with Western markets, in a very short period of time. They weren't going to wait 20 years to go all through the stages that we were. So, I think, people will embrace digital technology immediately where they haven't already. And there are increasingly less examples of markets where that hasn't happened.
Perhaps a quick question. What place will print media have in the media palette in the next 3 years? Can we expect a continued reduction in the proportion of ad spend compared to the rest of the pie? Or will we find perhaps maybe disillusionment with other areas that are emerging, or a renewed argument that integrating advertising that includes print, TV, online, makes print essential to a certain degree?
Well, I'm a wholehearted believer in the integrated approach, definitely. But I think it's from my perspective, is much more about what are audiences going to want from print, and the marketing dollars will follow that. So I think, in particular, the B2B space, there's still a role for print. I don't see that going away tomorrow. Trade publications, reference materials, reference books and things like that. Declining, yes, but not going away. I think in the day-to-day news, tomorrow's fish and chip wrapper type of publications, I think there is going to be many more of those yet to go out of business. And so I think it really depends on exactly which area of the market you're talking about. I think the magazine market has an opportunity to rethink itself. I think the printed medium is good for an immersive experience. It's good for an entertainment, a lean back, a relaxation kind of experience. And they just have to figure out how to do that in a way that makes economic sense, with some degree of creativity and leveraging digital as well. And then I think the marketing dollars follow where the audience eyeballs are. I mean, the marketers don't care what platform it is. They care about what results they get at the end of the day. So if you have a very engaged audience with a quality editorial product, there'll be money for it.
I think there's a process involved of natural selection here, quite honestly, because, I mean, at the end of the day, we don't sit down and think about, we're going to spend this proportion of our budget in print and this proportion of our budget in television and this proportion of our budget in digital. I mean, we analyze our audiences from a psychographic and a demographic point of view, and we try and reach them in the most engaging ways possible. So, I mean, it really depends what the audience is doing. So, I mean, the advice, I think, to anybody, and this really sounds like teaching your grandmother how to suck eggs, quite honestly, but to anybody in media is make sure that you're reaching the audience and you're engaging with the audience, and the advertising dollars will simply follow. I mean, like Alisa, I don't think that there's any chance of the sort of printed page disappearing anytime soon, quite honestly. But, I wouldn't cling to that word print too much. I would just simply see it as a delivery vehicle, which I'm sure is the way most media owners view it today.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. We're going to break for lunch now, and we'll see you on the other side.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
It's nice to see you, too.